Hello and welcome to the Great Festival Read session from the 2020 Bathurst Writers and Readers Festival. I'm Jenny Barry from BooksPlus, who are partners with BMAC and wonderful BMAC staff, Kali, Jade and Heidi and Anand, in bringing you the festival online for the first time this year. We have a terrific panel who you'll all meet very soon, gathered together to talk about this wonderful Great Festival Read novel this year, The Yield by Tara June Winch, which is published by Hamish Hamilton, an imprint of Penguin Random House Books Australia. So I'd like to hand across to two of our panellists, Wiradjuri elders, Wirribee, Leanna Carr-Smith and Yanhadarrambal, Jade, Flynn, to conduct a welcome to country.
Go on then, sis.
Yeah. Yurdu Marang, Yamandu Marang, Yuanadi Wirribee. I said g'day. My name is Leanna Carr-Smith. My traditional name is Wirribee. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome you all to Wiradjuri country. And Wiradjuri, we're the people of the Goanna totem, the Dorleen. We're river people, so the Wambul, the Macquarie, the Galari, which is the Lachlan, and the Murrumbidgee, which is the Murrumbidgee. Yana and I are honoured to be a part of this festival, and also acknowledge that it's one of our sister girls who's actually won a few awards just over the last 24 hours or 48 hours. And we're honoured to sit here on the panel with the other panellists and talk about this deadly book, The Yield. I recommend it to all people to read, even if you're not an avid book reader. I think it's a book that all Australians should read. And it takes you on a journey, and walking in, the shoes of an Aboriginal woman, but not just her, but also her connection to country and her kinship. And for Yana and people like myself, that's very close to our heart. So I'm looking forward to talking with the other panellists. And yeah, Gawambana, Wiradjuri Norangbang. Welcome to Wiradjuri country, Mandangu.
Thanks, Sissy. Nyonyani Yanhadarrambal, Nyonyani Yora Yora, Wiradjuri Narangi, go Nyampa Wangabuan Bilar Kiali, Guambana go Wiradjuri Norangbang, Yinjamara Wiradjuri Moyalang, Yinjamara Wiradjuri Norangbang, Moyalang and Norangbang. So I said, hey, I'm Yanhadarrambal, I'm Yora Yora and I'm Nyampa through the Bilartri people, and I'm Wiradjuri through the Narangi clan. And welcome to Wiradjuri country, respect to Wiradjuri country and respect to Wiradjuri people. And it's an honour to sit here with my sis and my colleagues to talk about this awesome book. So thank you.
Mandangu, Wirribee and Yana, thank you so much. Yana and Wirribee, we know that we're going to be talking about this wonderful book. Is there anything that you wanted to say in terms of, the issues raised in the book traced to a lot of Wiradjuri history? Is there anything you wanted to just say in terms of cultural safety around?
Yeah, so we might talk about some topics that the book raises that could be triggering for some people and could cause some concern. So we want to make sure that you guys have got access to the phone numbers that we're going to put on the screen to make sure that you can reach out if you are, if anything about what we speak about does upset you or trigger any negative emotions. We want to make sure that you've got the care that you need. We want to make sure that you know from the get-go that we're going to provide a culturally safe environment while we walk through this conversation with you. But it's important that you know that your cultural safety is important, even though we can't physically be with you in the same room. We're still with you in spirit and in heart. So make sure that you do reach out either to us or to the numbers and the information that we're going to have on the screen if you do need to do that. Manangu.
Thank you, Yana. Thank you, Wirribee. I'd now like to ask the rest of the panel to introduce themselves and say hello. So I might begin with you, Barb, if that's all right.
Hello everyone, I'm Barb Hill. I work at a university in Bathurst, Charles Sturt University. I'm lead of a small team called Gulay, which is a Wiradjuri word for bridge. And we work very closely with our academic colleagues and the elders across our footprint. I think it's really important that we start having these conversations everywhere. My background is actually in literature, and it's so wonderful to have Tara's book, and I think it's going to be such an important read for all of us. So thank you for inviting me. Mandangu.
Thank you, Barb. Marg, I'm going to cross to you to say hello.
My name is Margaret Ling. I'm here as an avid reader. My background in more recent years is as a nurse within the jail system. I'm very glad to be part of this group of people discussing this wonderful, wonderful book, and I look forward to carrying on and discussing it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marg. Stephen, can I throw to you, please?
Sure. Wirribee, Yuandu Stephen Champion, manager of BMEC, and amongst other things that we do, probably one of the central, most important things is our connection to the local Aboriginal community and the Wiradjuri elders, and it's been an honour working with them over the past, well, more than 10 years now. It's a real honour to be on this panel. This book is an incredibly special book, and yeah, that's why it's won the 3 awards that it's won, and I'm sure it'll win many more. And it's definitely a book that everybody should read. Yeah, I can't wait for the exciting chat we're about to have. Mandangu.
Thank you, Stephen. And last but not least, Lisa. Hello.
Hi, Jen. My name is Lisa Holloway. I'm the office coordinator at the Bathurst Library. And I'm also an avid reader like Marg and most of the other people on the panel. I love to read, and I thank Jen and all the panelists for having me here. It's a treat. It's something new for me. I've loved the discussions that we've had before. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're having today. I agree with everyone else as well. This book is just fantastic. It's got so many layers to it. I loved reading it, and yeah, I look forward to chatting about it some more.
Mandangu, everybody. It's wonderful to, for me as well, to be part of this very, very special panel talking about this wonderful book, which, as Wirribee and Barb and Stephen have said, and Lisa said, took out 3 incredible awards at the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards on Sunday night. And that was the Book of the Year, the Christina Stead Prize for Fiction, and the People's Choice, which such a special award. And our heartiest congratulations to Tara June Winch for such an incredible achievement and such recognition, which is so well deserved. Tara is a Wiradjuri woman, as Wirribee says, and she was going to be in Australia at this time at the Sydney Writers' Festival, and she was going to come to Bathurst to be part of the, well, to listen to the panel discussion and to also be in conversation about her novel. But sadly, due to the current pandemic, she was unable to come. But she has kindly recorded her thoughts and responses to some questions about the novel and sent them to us. And so directly following this session, you'll be able to hear Tara chatting about her wonderful book, The Yield. And I'll just give a quick synopsis of the book, but I'm sure everyone on the panel will be able to give much more detail than I. But it tells the story of August Gundawindi, a young Wiradjuri woman returning home to country for the funeral of her grandfather, Albert Poppy Gundawindi. And Albert Poppy Gondawindi was raised on country, but as a young child was sent to a boys' home, but has come back and lives at Prosperous Downs near Massacre Plains by the river on the side of the old mission. And Poppy's aim before he passes was to record the Wiradjuri dictionary, which details so much of the history and culture and stories of his people and his ancestors. And there is also a third narrative in the book, that of Reverend Greenleaf, who was the Lutheran minister at the mission, which Prosperous Downs is situated upon. And in the latter part of the book, after August's return home, she's involved in trying to protect her people's land from a mining company who are wishing to resume it. So Wirribee, if I might begin our discussion with you. You yourself studied Wiradjuri language many years ago with Dr. Uncle Stan Grant Sr., one of the compilers of the actual Wiradjuri dictionary with Dr. John Rudder. And the Wiradjuri dictionary is such a central theme of this book. And you have worked in teaching language and sharing culture for many, many years in schools and continue to do so. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the impact of loss of language and the importance of reclaiming language, especially through the Wiradjuri dictionary in the story.
First, I would like to just acknowledge that this week for First Nation people is a pretty emotional week. The last few days I've been doing a lot of reading and looking at a lot of different articles. But what it always brings me back to is country, like the Nurungbang, which in our language is country. And I think what I'd like to start with is just a little bit of the backstory to my family history. So my great-grandmother was a Hickey, and she was taken from a little place called Brungle down near Tumut. She was one of 10 who was removed under the Aborigines Protection Act back in 1890. She was about the second lot of little children that was taken, and she ended up at Cootamundra Girls' Home, and her brothers, some of them ended up at Kinchela, others ended up down at Bombaderi, down at Nowra. And I suppose for me and for my family, colonisation sort of just tore our family apart, you know, through the generations. And one of the things that was taken from her and taken from my mother and my grandmother was language. And it wasn't until I sort of came, you know, when I was born, that I didn't know anything about my language or my culture. And we still lived a semi sort of traditional life growing up, if that's what I could call it. I remember my family, we actually lived on the reserve at Dubbo, and we used to go out there all the time and check our fish traps, and more or less I thought we were camping. I didn't know that that's how we lived, and I didn't see it any different, you know. And we sort of, I think as a child you always think that you're lucky. You know, we had two houses. We had a house in town, and then we also had a house out of town. That's the lights. And I think for me personally, that's how I seen it. My life as a child was like one big adventure, one big, you know, journey. And a part of that journey was relearning language with my old grandmothers and with my mothers. And for me, even though my great-grandmother, you know, the old girl from Brungle, was forbidden to speak language, she gave it back to us while we were on country. That's why I think for me and for most Aboriginal people, when you read this book, you know, language comes from country, you know, and it comes through the voices of our ancestors and from our grandmothers and our grandfathers and from our old people. And I think that if there's a message that I would like, to talk about, especially today and this week, for us as First Nation people, is that we are still connected to country, and it comes through our language, and it comes through our culture and our identity and our heritage. And, through the hardships that our old people have suffered, Wiradjuri language, especially for, I hate to say this, but, we're one of the most fortunate language groups in the eastern side of, New South Wales, like on this eastern coast and here in New South Wales, to have most of our language like restored, and I don't say that with to be happy about it. I say that, because we had a lot of old people like my grandmothers, and like a lot of my old aunties and uncles in Dubbo and Wellington that helped to put this language back together, So these stories in the Yield are very, very similar, right across the whole of the Wiradjuri nation, and in different clan groups. So for me, I'd like to say that I really enjoyed reading this book. And I think that, this week being a historical week for us as Australians, whether you're a First Nation person or if you're not, I think that this book, I think we all should be encouraging as many people as we can to read this, so they can get a better understanding of I suppose, what we have and what we had and what we're now reclaiming as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Thank you, Wirribee. Yana, for you, as Lisa said, we've chatted previously, and you talked about how familiar reading this book was for you in terms of your country and how much you related to this story.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I'm really well connected into, I guess, most of the groups in the traditional White Nations in New South Wales. So some of the descriptions in the book just reminded me of my own homelands. Probably more reminded me of down towards where Yorta and Wiradjuri border more than anything else. Just felt really familiar when the characters in the book are describing the landscape and what was there before, some of the cultural practices and agricultural and aquaculture and all that sort of stuff that are described are exactly, basically where I'm from and where my family's from. And yeah, it did feel really familiar. I felt like it was a family member describing home in a way, which I found really fascinating and really interesting. And I thought the way that country is described in this book, even though it's a story, it still feels quite real. Still feels quite vivid. Like these are places that you could actually visit. So I enjoyed that about it. Yeah.
And Barb, you've worked closely at Goulet with the Wiradjuri elders for many years now, and you talk about how reminiscent of old language the novel was, and all of the aspirations and intentions that the language was calling up in the book.
Yes, thanks, Jen. I think with language always comes voice, and I think the beauty of this book is that it's got many voices, but three main voices, I suppose, and that's how we view a period of time, and through those three different voices. But with language, I think it's the most important thing that we have in the world, because it brings to the surface all the aspirations. As soon as you're on, out of the womb, you're hearing language. And I think from walking with the elders in Wiradjuri country and also in Yempa country, all the time, as Sissy and Yana have said, you know, things are being called out and things are being, your attention's being brought to it. And I think, you know, the yield is like that, just in a megaphone. It's calling out to us. It's saying, you know, listen up. You know, this is about a lot of voices, but you know, it's absolutely our responsibility to respond to those voices. And I think as non-Indigenous people, you know, sitting with this book is really important. And the way that it works with time in concert with language is amazing, just amazing. But just as amazing as all our elders who do the same thing every day. And I'd just like to acknowledge the work that goes on across the country that is often not known about or acknowledged. So thank you, Tara. You've really kind of, you know, as Uncle Bruce Pascoe, you know, once said, you know, I'm just telling the story at this point in time. But the story's always there. But I think it takes a great moral and cultural courage to come forward and to write such a beautiful time.
I agree with you, Barb. Thank you so much. Stephen, if I could ask you, you said how much the entries in Poppy's Wiradjuri dictionary resonated for you about seeing the words and the language on the page, how beautifully that was told.
Yes, it's one of the beautiful things about the book is that it's a weaving of fact and fiction. It's not just, yeah, it's both, and the way they're woven together. And I think the dictionary epitomizes that weaving of fact and fiction, that it's the words are brought to life in the dictionary because of the stories that Albert tells around the words. So the words are part of the Wiradjuri language. The stories certainly are based in reality and stories of time, you know, always was, always will be, but they're part of the fiction as well. And it's just beautiful. I find it's so much easier, and I think it's what Tara's saying, that the language, and it's what Barb was saying, and what Wirribee and Yana have said as well, that the language is connected to the earth, and you understand that connection so much more as a reader when you have Albert's story beside the word. It's or following the word or around the word. Yeah, I think that as I try to learn little bits of Wiradjuri, you know, to get to know the language better, that I'll be going back to this book, to the dictionary in this book, to connect me a little bit more to those words in a way that doesn't happen when it's just a dictionary definition in the traditional sense.
Yes. And Marg, you also speak about how important Albert's dictionary is in the situational pictorial description of the stories and culture and language. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. The dictionary, just as a main theme of the book, was also a pot holding, you know, so many stories, and it filled so many roles. The dictionary it's language which is being re-gifted to the people whose language it is. And in that, as Wirribee and Yana have been speaking, it is so important to them. And Stephen, with the sound of the language, and you get this in the book too, the sound of the language is the language spoken by people. It's part of the ground, the soil and that. But the roles of the language is not just language. In terms of Albert reclaiming that language as given to him by the ancestors, he's handing it over to his descendants and to all the other people who would in different times have spoken that language. He's giving them their own history. And in history, you're giving people continuation. You're giving them presence through a great length of time, going back those thousands of years. That history gives people that. He's also giving them, re-giving people their culture, the story of culture. And he's giving, within the story of the book, he's giving to August and the family, his broader family, and the people of the community, a tool with which they can begin the process of reclaiming the land that was theirs and still is theirs. Though the mining companies and the government bodies say otherwise, the land is still their land. And so he's actually handing over in this book, in this dictionary, a great amount of power and strength to the individual people to grasp and to use in the one of the themes of the book, which is reclaiming the land and keeping it and resisting other people's demands for that land to be theirs for their own use. Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful book and deeply, deeply moving and deeply, deeply stressful, and also filled with hope. There's a lot of strength and hope as we reach the end of this book. And the end of this book is the climax of the book too. It's sort of the beginning, really, the end of the book. Mm. So that's how I travelled through the dictionary itself anyway.
Thank you, Marg. Lisa, we know there are 3 narratives in the novel, and you highlight, like everybody, how core the dictionary is to the story unfolding. And you said for yourself, like, learning about Indigenous history was such a revelation in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Tara June has structured this book in such a way that will enable the reader to learn very easily about the story that she's wanting to tell. And I think obviously that central narrative coming from Poppy Albert and the writing of the dictionary and explaining what the definition of those words are in a storytelling sense, I think is just a genius way of not only teaching that language to Poppy's descendants, but also to the reader, to non-Indigenous people like myself. It's not just like the traditional dictionary where there's just a very brief definition of a word. There's a story behind it. There are people behind it. There are emotions. There are experiences. There's devastation. There's so much to the word that he's actually passing on the meaning of. And I think that's just it's a beautiful way of teaching a language, and I think it's a beautiful way of passing his story on to his descendants as well. I just think it's such a clever way of passing on a message to a reader, and also from within the story, from within the book, passing on language to his descendants and his children, and making sure that that's a legacy that he leaves for them. I thought it was just genius, and it was beautiful, and it was funny, and it was devastating, and it was so many things wrapped up. It was just a joy to read. I mean, the whole book was a joy to read, but particularly that element, that narrative from Poppy Albert was an absolute treasure.
Thanks, Lisa. Wirribee and Yana, I know earlier on, and Barb, you talked about the non-linear sense of time that's threaded throughout this story, and how important, especially for non-Indigenous readers like myself and Marg and Lisa and all the readers, non-Indigenous readers watching, to understand that concept, how cleverly Tara has weaved that concept through the story.
What I think the best example of that for my family is my grandmother. She was about 103 when she passed. And I got a copy of her, like her birth record, the record of her birth. And she was born under a tree down there at Brungle. And so you can just imagine like the stories that she had told like me and shared with me over my lifetime. And like my family's pretty big, you know, she had 10 children herself, and most of those, her children had like between 7 and 10 kids there. So I'm from a pretty big family, but I'm one of the granddaughters and the great granddaughters who had the opportunity to learn. It's sort of like what how Lisa's explained, but in our culture in Wiradjuri, we call that the continuum. It's a learning continuum. So what it does is it filters down from generation to generation. So when you think about it, say for somebody like myself, who's a fifth generation, you know, because there was 5 generations in my family of language speakers until it came to my generation, and I didn't have any of that. And then I was lucky to learn straight from my grandmother and my great grandmother. And it's sort of the story of like, you know, it's Poppy Alby's story. Like we went on country, you know, like when I said earlier about how we sort of had 2 houses, you know, when we were on country and when we were in the bush, that's how we learnt language. Because for us, and for me personally, I'm a visual learner, you know, so when my grandmothers and when my old nan used to talk about language and talk about like the trees and everything that was in the environment, I was able to see it. So it wasn't just a tree, but this tree was, and it belonged to. So every single thing that she taught us in language came with its own backstory. But it was a physical part of that story that I could connect with. So for me now that they've gone home, you know, to the ancestors, my responsibility now as a grandmother myself is I teach the same way that I was taught, you know, so the same way that my grandmothers taught me, that's how I teach my little grannies. You know, so you know, we can't do it now, obviously, because of the, you know, the pandemic that we sit in and the situation, the global situation. But for my 4 little grannies, that's exactly the way that I teach. I teach like the way that the old people taught me. So I love that Lisa's was able to understand the structure of how Poppy Albert was sharing his language. But for people like myself and Yana, and Bidai knows this too, because we have a strong relationship with the Empire elders, that's how the old people like taught, and that's how we learned. And I think that for me personally, like when you read that through the book, it just resonates and it feels so, it feels like home, you know, it feels so, I'm so comfortable with that. And also the fact that that's the way that I get to teach my little grannies. So for me personally, like, it's like Yana said, it's like reading about your own family. And I think that that's what that's what I feel and that's what I felt. And as I was reading through the book.
Thanks, Sissy. I really love the way that Tara has played with the concept of non-linear time and put it in a way that I reckon non-Aboriginal people can sort of get a hold of and understand. So there's this saying of always was, always will be Aboriginal land. As Aboriginal people, we always were and we always will be. And the story doesn't change. The story is always the story since the Gujin, since the time of the beginning. Times change and circumstances change and things happen, but we as a people are still the same people as we were at the Gujin. And I think that comes across in the book in the way that you've got the 3 different, I guess, senses of scale of time when you've got the Reverend, sending all the letters about what's happening in the early days of the mission. And then you've got Poppy telling his stories of the ancestors visiting him and speaking to him and telling him the stories in language. And then you've got Augie, the main character, kind of giving her now and here version of the same story. It's all basically the same story. And I love how Tara's presented that concept of non-linear time, the concept of always has been, always will be. And it's, you know, I think that's really important for non-Aboriginal people here in Australia to understand that concept of the story hasn't changed. Our stories have never changed. We don't change them. They don't get passed from one generation to the other and then someone tweaks it a bit and takes a chapter out or whatever. The oral stories that we've been passed have been the same since the beginning. And yeah, so I take my hat off to Tara for the way that she's presented that concept of non-linear time. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Barb, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think, thanks, Wirribee and Yana and everyone, Lisa and Margaret and Stephen, because I think, you know, the insights are really important because as readers, all of us come to this one novel and read a different novel. And I'd just like to acknowledge that because I think in a way it's got that makes it stronger too. But I think I was trying to find, you know, as you do, you know, with something as wonderful as this, a thing that kind of just jumped out at you. And I thought I had put my bookmark in and now I'm going to find that I haven't. And isn't that just the way it goes? But it was around the time thing. And it's on page 288 and it's down the bottom. And it's a conversation with the cousins, and it just really spoke to me. And I'll just read, if that's all right, just read a little bit of it. So I just remember thinking we should all lie here and see how cool our eyes are. I was hoping they could see what I saw. What are you talking about? Seeing two things at the same time. Here and there, close and far, now and before. And that one sentence, it really kind of spoke to me, and because I think what Tara's done with this book is played with time in such a skillful way. And as Yana says, those stories that come down, you know, orally from person to person, also come with, you know, a responsibility. And I think somehow she marries those two things at the same time, bringing down in a very, you know, a soft touch the generational trauma. And I think you couldn't, as a non-Aboriginal person, read this book and not deeply get how that happens and how powerful it is. And, you know, those people that, you know, keep saying, well, I'm not responsible, it's not my fault, you know, that kind of cultural narrative that we have, that voice, you know. I think the way to moving to where we need to go in this country is through empathy and compassion. And I think novels like this have the ability to move us across vast differences and chasms in some ways, and not to make us all the same, but to acknowledge why we are where we are.
Thank you, Bob, because the truth telling within the story is such a potent thread, and it's one of the things Wirribee, you know, talk about in terms of, you know, the impact of colonisation for Wiradjuri people. Truth telling is such an important part of this story.
Yeah, and I think that like I said, and I don't want to harp on about it because I don't want to give it too much attention, but, you know, the emotional roller coaster of this week, especially for, like I said, First Nation people, you know, the impact, you know, of 250 years of colonisation and what it's done to us is it's tried to, you know, I suppose, strip us of our identity as Wiradjuri people, you know, of our culture and our heritage and of our being, you know, our language. You know, like I've tried to explain it to you about my grandmother, you know, she was 4 generations away from me. And it took that long for me to relearn my language, you know, and I always thought as a young child that, you know, everyone did what I did. But I didn't, you know, it wasn't until you become an adult that you realise that that was a part of our survival, you know. And I've had to change the narrative, I suppose, you know, especially the cultural narrative for my kids and for my own little grannies now. And the most important part of my narrative, especially for my yarns I have with my little grannies, is language. You know, I'll be forever grateful to the old people of my country, of Wiradjuri, especially to people like Uncle Stan Grant and, you know, Dr. John Rudder. You know, they were the ones at the forefront, but it was all of those old people behind the scenes that, you know, contributed to the language, you know, and that comes through in this story, you know, in this book, in this journey, you know, that Tara June takes us on with Poppy, you know, with her Poppy. And, you know, I think about my grandmothers, they were a part of putting, you know, language into our Wiradjuri dictionary. You know, that's why we have 2 dictionaries now. And I think that what I want to say is that language belongs to country, and we as Wiradjuri people, we belong to country too. And I think for non-Aboriginal people, what they, you know, what we've been trying to explain for the last 232 years is that, you know, we belong to the land. Like, you know, we don't own the land. You can't own the land. But in the land and in our country and is the stories, you know, and they come through with language and law. And all of that is, that's entwined in our DNA as Aboriginal people. And I think that's what I loved about this. It sort of took me on back into my own past and into my own journey as a child, and also becoming a young mother myself, and wanting to relearn my language, you know, because I had some of those words, you know, some of that vocabulary was in the back of my mind. And it wasn't until like I, you know, had the opportunity to enroll in language again about 20 years ago, I think it was, and relearn language. So for me, this book, it sort of took me back on my own journey, and it sort of, you know, I suppose reassured me too, you know, that about us as Aboriginal people, and especially as Wiradjuri, that our stories are still here because we're still here. You know, it's like Yana said, you know, this is where we belong, and I think that comes through really strongly for me in the book.
And Stephen, as a non-Indigenous reader, for you, this novel set so strongly in Wiradjuri country was a real revelation for you, as it is, I'm sure, for all of us on the panel, non-Indigenous readers.
Yeah, it makes a really important connection to the place that you live. Absolutely. Well, I think Tara June does an amazing job of not placing the story, though, in any one part of Wiradjuri Nation, but representing the entire nation. One interesting thing is that weaves through the book is the blending of seeming simplicity with enormous complexity. The simplicity is evidenced by the naming of the town, Massacre Plains. It's such a sort of a direct name, and when you first hear it, you think, why would you call a town Massacre? Of course, there are many reasons, but over more than 300 pages, you get used to it, and then you question. You're getting used to the name Massacre Plains, and when you read, when I grew up not knowing any Aboriginal people, growing up in the northern beaches of Sydney, and when I found out about massacres, I spoke to my parents, and they said, "No, Stephen, there weren't any massacres." And then you read Bruce Elder's book, Blood on the Wattle, and you know that the country was covered in thousands of massacres, and the word Massacre Plains has a very, it has a multi-layered truth-telling essence to it that is same with prosperous and the same with broken. They're such simple names to give these places, but they bring up so many questions. It's fascinating, and something that comes up as well that's multi-layered, and there's a lot of truth-telling to be done is the collecting in museums of relics, and the repatriation that's needed of some of those relics, and how that's going to be handled over coming years. There's Tara June brings up so many things that we still haven't dealt with, and presents them in a way that you gain an understanding of the personal nature of those elements, like massacres, like not land not being there to be owned, and there are so many things that we can take from this book that'll start conversations that we can share as a nation. And they're the conversations that we have to have, and she's presented them in such stimulating ways as starting point of those conversations. And it gives me a much greater sense of connection to the country that I live in. Absolutely.
And Lisa, for you, that was something as well, like Stephen has said, about learning that history through this incredible book, that Indigenous story of Wiradjuri country.
Yeah, it's sort of as we've spoken about, there's lots within this single book to learn and discover and to understand and to empathise with and to grow from. But what it also does is it's like a launching pad or a platform from which to learn more about Indigenous culture in Australia more broadly. And again, that's just a wonderful thing. You leave the book still wanting to know more. You want to know more about Wiradjuri. You want to know more about, the Indigenous culture from where you came from. And that's what it did for me. It sort of led me down a bit of a rabbit hole over the last sort of number of weeks for me since reading this book. I've read other non-fiction books, and I'm now on to other fiction books. I'm reading Too Much Lip at the moment. I'm a little bit behind the times there, I must apologise. But yeah, I can't get enough of this at the moment. It's not too often that I will read one book and then want to actually sort of stay in that world and keep going with that particular genre or that time or place or that theme. I like to mix it up as a reader, but with this one, I just want to know more, and it's taken me down a journey. I was born in Tasmania, in the northwestern part of Tasmania, and I wanted to know more about the Indigenous culture there and how colonisation affected Tasmania. And I knew that there had been massacres, and I knew that there had been people stolen and treated badly and all the rest of it, but I sort of wanted to know a little bit more closer to home, my ancestors from Tasmania, if they had any knowledge or stories or connection to what happened to to the Indigenous Tasmanians, and so I've sort of been going down that rabbit hole over the last few weeks and learning bits and pieces about that. And it's whilst I haven't found anything directly relating to my ancestors, it just broadens your whole perspective on what actually happened. And the truth telling, like I think we've all just said, you must learn the truth, you must understand the truth, you must understand what really happened before you can then move forward. And I think that's what's missing in Australia, like in current Australian life, is that for some really bizarre reason we just don't want to know, and yet I feel compelled to learn about these things. You must know what happened then. You may not be, individually as a person responsible for some of those horrible things that took place hundreds of years ago, but it is our responsibility to acknowledge that yes, it did happen, and there are consequences of that still remain today, and we must acknowledge that, and we must act upon it to make it, not to make it right, because you can't make it right, but you must use that information and that truth to move forward, and to develop connection with other people in your community, and to empathize and to understand, and to sort of bridge that awful big hole that we have in Australian culture at the moment, where people just don't want to know, like that. It's got to be told. These books have to be written. More books have to be written. More truth telling has to come forward for us to all get a really true understanding of what happened in our past. And it's the only way that we can reconcile the past, understand it, empathize with it, and move forward. And then really embrace Aboriginal culture. We're just so lucky in this country to have this amazing culture that a lot of us don't know enough about, and we don't celebrate it, we don't speak it. I'm very envious of the New Zealand Maori culture, and the way they've brought it into like everyone's lives there. It doesn't matter if you're Maori or not, like they speak it and they learn it in schools and in their families and in sporting events and all the rest of it. And we just don't seem to have that same sort of level in Australia, and that's what I would like to see moving forward. And I think books like this help us do that. They help us understand what happened, acknowledge that it did happen, and then try and build some mechanisms throughout our schools and culture, and that will bring us together, and will embrace it and enjoy this truly wonderful culture that we have. It's just it's so very important, and I'm so grateful that the Wiradjuri area that I live in has this language that is still alive and still moving forward. I think it's really, really special, and we can only learn from these stories, and we must learn from these stories. It's it's just so important. We have to do it. Everyone should read this book.
We agree. And one of the things Tara said in her acceptance speech for the Premier's Literary Awards was she called on the Department of Education to implement Indigenous languages, embed them within the curriculum. And, I know that's something dear to your heart, Wirribee and Yana and Barb. And, I just hope that this wonderful book goes some way in being able to make that happen more and more and more. One of the things you've all said, I know especially for you, Wirribee and Yana, is about how you wanted to know more at the end of this book, that the characters of Missy and Augie just, reached into your hearts and you wanted to know more. Is that something, you can talk about a bit, Yana?
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of felt like, there's an auntie over in the next town that's had a big yarn with you and told you all these stories, and the characters feel really relatable, and some of the scenarios are similar to scenarios that we experience and go through, good and bad. And it just felt, at the end of it, I kind of just wanted to know what happened Augie and you know, and Nan and her auntie that were living together. I wanted to know how the native title stuff went. It felt a little bit sort of all very tidied up at the end, as books go, as some books go, and that's all well and good. But yeah, I guess it'd be nice if it was like that in real life with the native title battles and the Ilua battles and the battles that we have to protect country. If we could just wrap it up like that, that'd be awesome. But no, look, I really wanted to get to know the characters more. I felt like I think someone else mentioned it. It felt like the end of the book was the start. Marg, you mentioned that.
Yes.
It really did feel like that for me as well. I felt like, you know, I'd just gotten to know these people and they felt so relatable. Like I said, it felt like my own aunties and my own cousins and stuff like that, with the little funny little side stories that are in it and the funny little quotes and quirks that made it so relatable. So yeah, I really kind of, you know, now that I've read the book, I miss hanging out with the mob, you know.
Because Marg, I think, you know, when we chatted before, all of us, you spoke about for August how important her return home is, and in this novel, Tara is talking about family and love and redemption and reconnection. And for you really highlighted you know, August living away and her return and the symbolism of that and what that meant for her.
Yes. As I entered the book with August living away and being brought back because of the loss of this wonderful, important person to her, I find that interesting. As we travel, we find that death has sent her away, loss has caused her to travel, to leave, and then also it has brought her back. She's in a place, I saw her as in a place of hibernation. I thought, this woman is in this country, she's been there 10 years in England, and she's not connected to anyone. She leaves there. At no point, or only briefly, does she refer to a connection with a friend. And it's as though I saw it that she was there, she was away in hibernation, removed from whatever the pain was, whatever the grief was, that she lived every day back in Prosperous. She left there, she left grief behind, or she left the evidence of grief, she left the reminders of it, she left the sadness, and she went to this place where she wasn't on a daily basis confronted with the reminders and the evidence of her personal suffering. And then she was brought back again by a loss. And how she described grief, how she mentioned grief, and then also with Elsie, how they referred to grief, I found really very affecting. When August receives the information that Poppy Albert has died, she feels as though she has somehow become less. She has become less substantial. There's a diminishment physically in who she has. And that's a very powerful description of the loss through death of someone that you love. And then we come back and we travel through the book and we come near the end of the book, and Elsie refers to that place, Prosperous, that area, not being home in a way anymore because Albert is not there. Albert is the witness to her life. And that took me back to Jeddah and August, because Jeddah was the witness to August's life, her first 10 years of her life. Jeddah was the constant. Jeddah was the witness to her life. And once Jeddah was gone out of her life, she was alone and empty. I think I'm a little bit overwhelmed, I suppose, in terms of the content of this book. There is absolutely so much. There's barely a page that passes that isn't worthy of thought and discussion. And I think the thing that holds it in check and gives it a framework, of course, is the dictionary. Because one thing I forgot to mention earlier is something we all see is that the dictionary acts as a guide for the people who read it on how to be, because he gives them a history of how things have been done and how to be in respect of these words, because no word lives alone. Words like, and we see evidence of the impact, evidence of the true meaning in terms of language of those words in his description of how they are. I think especially of the word respect. He said respect is a word that only exists in a true sense between equals. That is respect. And I found that really interesting in reading the path of Greenleaf, who comes in to the community full of compassion and power and wants to redeem these people who live such a devastated life. So he struggles to bring them all together, to make them safe from the marauding colonialists, and he provides a physical security to a very average extent, because he doesn't actually have that much power. And it is in further devastation of the community through drought, absence of food, starvation, loss of crops, sheep dying, that he permits the people to re-establish their traditional ways. And in re-establishing their traditional ways, they enable the community to survive. And you see him grow and develop a sense of equality and respect. And I saw that as Poppy's respect become apparent within the book in its true sense, where he sees that he is amongst equals. That, of course, ultimately is a powerless man, and he knows that his respect won't enable them to be secure or safe. I think evidence of his respect is absorbing their language and spiritual beliefs into his framework of Christianity. He feels uncomfortable, he has doubt, but he does it because it seems right, because that's the framework in which they're all functioning well. It's the framework in which there is traditional ways on that land. So August's return is, this is the whole, obviously I've gone off at a tangent there with the respect, but it had a big impact on me, as did the word truth. The truth is not, I think, not in the dictionary. I see Albert driven by truth in writing his dictionary. Truth must be known. He's directed by the ancestors to give people the truth. And in giving the truth, someone will hear him. Someone will hear him, and that's all he can do, give people the truth, and someone will listen to what he has to say. And that's Greenleaf's path too. He's offering the truth. In desperation, he offers the truth. And Greenleaf's truth has no impact for a long time. Greenleaf's truth is meaningful to all of us now, because I think most of us are listening to the truth. And Albert's truth is very, very powerful too. His truth is something that we're all listening to, and his truth is something that will empower the Aboriginal people.
Yes. And Barb, I know you spoke about that in some senses August's story has a coming of age aspect to it, and the care that Tara June has taken in weaving her story.
Yes, I think, well, I'm thinking and speaking at the same time, which is not always good, but I think Mark hit on something about the representation of grief, and I think in the novel it's all through it. But, you know, as we know, coming of age of leaving childhood and growing up, accepting our responsibilities at every stage. It's a process of grief, because you're grieving for your small self, your lost self, your family self, and I think she touches on that so beautifully so many times. And when Marg said, home wasn't home without Poppy, because he wasn't calling her, across the fields. And I just thought, oh, it was such a beautiful, beautiful image, And I think returns are the same, when you go back to places that you've loved dearly, there's always that sense of time doing weird things. Everything seems smaller sometimes, and sometimes they seem larger. And I think, Tara does those lovely light touches that are so, we can recognise, squinting through fly screens and imagining the world in a different way, I don't know, driving just because you can, and running because you can, and getting away. But the coming of age thing, I think she's powerfully evoked, especially with the trauma of childhood. And not all of us get the opportunity to have a happy, protected childhood, and I think she treats that very just very skillfully, because it's kind of, it could drown the rest of the voices out, it could drown the whole story, but the way it's like a spider web, she's bringing us all to the experience of these characters in such a careful way.
Yes, and her, as you say, some of the ways she writes about childhood are just so incredibly moving, and how her and Jetta, wanted a happy, peaceful childhood, but like you say, Barb, that's not always possible. And
well, I think, Jen, like writing the letters to Princess Diana, and they were just so wonderful. Or winning the prize from the cartoon.
with aggro,
and I think all of us can relate to that. Where you'd be, if you had, which window are we going to look through today? we all, as little people, I think, had an opportunity to view the world with such optimism. But, there's always hard things as well.
Yes, and so much of August's return home is about integrating that, isn't it? And those connections, like you say, Yana, with Missy and with her grandmother, are just such a huge part of how that happens for August.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention too that I was not triggered, but I was slightly, I wasn't traumatized either, but I was definitely, I felt for some of the scenarios that were happening. And yeah, like the not ideal stuff like Bob touched on, that does happen. It did remind me of some of the stuff that happened to me as a younger person, and some of the not nice, things that happen in the world that we want to protect our children from. And so I think fair warning that the book does sort of delve into some of those issues. And as I mentioned before, it can be a little bit triggering and a little bit traumatizing if you are someone who's gone through an experience like what happens to Jetta in the book, which I won't go into. But yeah, there is a bit, the book does deal with a bit of trauma and a bit of things in life that shouldn't happen to children. So just, yeah, fair warning for those that are going to read it. Those things do come up, and make sure that, you know, you've got support around you, because it's a roller coaster. The book, it's a wonderfully written, very well presented book, but it does take you up to the heights and down to the depths, which is, you know, fantastic, and that's what you want in an experience like this. So I do highly recommend that you know, get hold of it, but make sure you've got a good support network around you, particularly if you are someone who's suffered any sort of trauma as a child, because this book will, you know, it might bring up those memories again for you, as it did with myself. But luckily, I've got good support around me, aunties and uncles and family members that care, and I was able to sort of go through those issues and talk about it. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, Jenny, just to make sure that people that are watching do read the book, but make sure that they know that it's important they've got that support around them if anything does come up.
Yes, thank you, Jan. It's so important. Like you say, it is some of the threads of the novel are very confronting, but understandably so in what she is trying to say. And yeah, that reconnection to childhood and memory and grief is such a powerful thread throughout this book. I'm going to open it up now to everybody to see if there's some other things they might like to comment or chat about, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm. Can I just make a point too? We've highlighted a number of fairly heavy-duty sort of topics that run throughout this book, and rightly so. However, I think, again, in Tara June's brilliance, she's been able to balance that out with some really not only beautiful descriptive language, but also some great humour. Barb just touched on it there, where there's a couple of pieces where Augie is remembering or thinking about her time as a child with her sister Jetta, and them recording music from the radio back in the day when we used to tape songs from the radio, and yeah, writing letters to Princess Di, who they just absolutely adored. Those descriptions of their childhood were just beautiful and made me smile as I was reading them. There were some funny elements where there were some conversations that would take place between Elsie and Augie, and also when Poppy Albert was describing a Wiradjuri word in his dictionary, in the story that he would tell about that word, he'd often reference obviously things in his past and in his life experience, and some of those examples were with experiences that he had with Elsie, his much beloved wife, and some of those stories about how they met, things, arguments that they would have, and how they got through those arguments were just hilarious. They were just so funny and so relatable and so real. They weren't over the top. They were just beautiful little pieces of sparkling, jewels that came up every now and then through the book, just to balance out the heaviness at times of what this book can be. And I think, again, that's just it just adds beautifully to the story and makes it real and makes it personal, but it also just lightens the load a little bit, I suppose, for a reader who is reading this, pretty hefty book that talks about a lot of really important things. And I think, yeah, that's just as a story writer, as someone who's telling a story, I think she does that just so well. And it just made it such a joy to read because it balanced that out, and I think that's really clever. I just wanted to point out, that there are some really beautiful, light, funny moments throughout the book, as well as the heavy moments, which is so important to read.
Yeah, I agree, Lisa. Like on that same page that I read from before, the sign that Poppy put on the outside of the house in Prosperous, you know.
Yeah.
No grog, no cash, no yarn, no yarndy, no good times here, you know. You think, oh God, haven't you heard that, you know, in your childhood and you know, no fun here, move on.
Yeah, totally
Just
agree.
beautiful.
Yeah, just lovely. Like it just again, it's I can't articulate just how clever it is that she just weaves that throughout the book and you know, just balances all it out. So you're not, and like, you know, Yana was saying, it is a roller coaster. You sort of, you know, you're reading some really heavy duty stuff and it's really serious and it takes your breath away, and there's sadness and there's devastation, but then, you know, in the next section there's light and joy and fun and, you know, all the wonderful things of childhood that make that time in everyone's life really special, and she just blends all of those different sorts of feelings and experiences together so beautifully, and balances it all out. So you come away with a completely full experience, and I think that's just, that's, you know, it's amazing how she's been able to tick all the boxes of what a good read is. You know, it's kind of extraordinary when you go through the list of things of what makes, you know, reading such a joy. She just does that with such ease and such deftness. It's quite astounding how talented she is.
And yeah, like you say as well, you know, in the latter part of the book, August's, you know, work to save Prosperous Downs from the tentacles of the dreaded mining company. You know, there's such a sense of hope and redemption in the latter part of the book. I think that's something you alluded to, Marg, about how redemptive it is for her. And it is such a wonderful way to end August's journey, is with that incredible sense of renewal at the end of the book.
I think there's a great deal of I experienced a great strong sense of empowerment by all the people involved towards the end of the book. It was acknowledging a power that was, and it was a relief to me. I was just gladdened at that point, but as I said before, just realising that this is just the beginning, and you know that, and they know that. Again, it's a moment's reprieve from all that has been that's caused harm, for people to regroup and begin a whole other process of being empowered. Whereas everybody has one of the words, actually back to the words of the dictionary. Albert has a word that writes a word that is altogether united. And altogether united, got that written here somewhere. He says that to be isolated is to be unable to act. And as we come into the book, many of the characters are isolated. August is isolated. There are the three sisters. Her mother is isolated, she's in jail. Her mother's two sisters, they live separate lives. Poppy, Albert and Elsie are together, but Albert is gone and there's just Elsie. She too is isolated. Everyone's apart. Joey has his own life. They're family, but they're separated. And in their separation, to some extent, they all, at the beginning of the book, as it becomes apparent that there's a big venture happening where the mining companies will take over the land and absolutely no one else has any rights to the land. They're isolated, they're powerless, and as circumstances bring them together, as the funeral of Albert brings them together and people start interacting and relating and connecting, and it seems to me be given by circumstances the tools they need to actually act on reclaiming the land and ensuring that they can be together. There is this huge empowerment that's happening. They are without power, and when they're isolated, but being brought together, they are then able to act, able to function as a stronger, more powerful group of people, as a larger entity. And that's really a very satisfying path to see for all these people who suffer alone to be brought together.
Yes, and her writing, the way she writes is, you know, at once poetic and so beautifully stated. But like you say, Lisa, as well, it's also couched in just such a fabulously readable story. And I know for all of you, reading about Indigenous stories in Wiradjuri country in this novel is just such an important thing. Like you said earlier, Stephen, how important it was to read about Wiradjuri country and history in a novel, a contemporary Australian novel.
Yeah, it's a great gift. And one tiny little thing I was thinking about is that she's very careful not to place the novel in a particular part of Wiradjuri country, but Kengal is real. The rock that looks over the Prosperous is a real rock south of Wagga Wagga, and it's just interesting, and it works all the way through the novel. This blending of reality and fiction and non-fiction. It works. It doesn't make you think, oh, that's where the book's set, but it sort of grounds it in an interesting way, and that happens all the way through. Just little things that strike you as being so real. And the generations. It's interesting that the strength that comes to August is really through her grandmother, her aunt, and then what she's able to muster herself. So it's those three generations working together that really allow a positive ending to the novel. And it's not just August fighting the world on her own. It's Elsie, Missy, and Auntie Missy and August all. It's the combined strength through those generations that gives Augie that strength. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but it's just that there are so many intersecting, interwoven elements that of richness in the book, as Lisa was saying. Yeah.
And like you say, Stephen, that interconnection from the generations, it's like Wirribee and Yanna, the power of mob and the power of connection to your family. And as you say, Stephen, it feels like it's set all across Wiradjuri country, and that's the sense I get from both you, Wirribee and Yanna, that's how it felt for you as well.
I think too, for non-Aboriginal people that will read this book, it's like what everybody's touched on, like how it's all intertwined, like it's entwined all together. But for us as Wiradjuri, it's just life. It's just our life. We talk about the fact that we've never just had, we don't have. We don't just have mother. We have like many mothers. Our grandmothers and our grandfathers they play like a vital role like in our lives. And I think that when you see it written down like in a story like this, in a book like this, for other people it probably is a bit complex. And it's probably like really it might be complicated, and it might be, but it's for us, it's in our DNA, and it's something that we live and breathe every single day of our lives. So I like the fact that everybody's been able to sort of pick up on that, because that's a part of our Wiradjuri, like our kinship, and also a part of our connection to other clan groups, and also to each other as Wiradjuri people. and then not just in country, but also like to the other nation groups that are around us. You know, it's a big it's a big story, you know, and I think that I like the fact that it's written, and for, you know, non-Aboriginal people, especially the others on the panel, you've been able to like pick up on that. You can see that. But like I said, we live that every day of our lives, you know. That's a part of our identity as Wiradjuri people. So it's a very different story for Wiradjuri, and especially for you know, and other nation groups too.
Yana?
Sorry, I thought Sissy's battery for her microphone had run out. That's why I was in there. But it's fine. It's fine.
You were just photo bombing, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. I just want to be all over this thing, you know. Just want Tara to know who I am. Yeah, sorry. So could you remind me of the question that you wanted me to comment on?
We were just saying how, you know, for her and all Wiradjuri people, this, you know, the story in the Yield is your life, is how it is. Especially for non-Indigenous readers, it's such a window into understanding the history and a sense of the rich, incredible culture of Wiradjuri people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is a pretty accurate reflection of family life for mob, not just Wiradjuri, but I grew up on Yampa country, so and I've got links down into Yorta country, but this, you know, it's sort of, the book reminds me of family across those nation groups, and there's a familiarity about it that I see in my own family with the way that we treat our old ones, and the stories that we tell when we get together as family and mob, you know, whether we're related or just the same mob, because not all Wiradjuri people are related to each other, if that makes sense. So yeah, no, it definitely is a window into how life is for a lot of different mob, for sure, and it's pretty accurate, really. Like I said before, it felt like I was reading about my own mob in a way, and it felt like I just wanted to know what the next step was for you know, for mob, for where they're going to take things, how it's going to look, what's going to happen next. Yeah, I really enjoyed that about it.
And that's the sign of an incredible story, isn't it? Where it leaves you not wanting to stop reading, and it is such a groundbreaking book. I think, I know you're saying, Wirribee, for you, it's your life, it's your mob, and you know how lucky, you know, we all are to be on Wiradjuri country. But I think for so many readers, it is a groundbreaking book, and I hope that it will, like everybody has said, it will be a book that more and more people read, and that it will be put into so many readers' hands. And I hope and know that so many local people will have read this novel, which is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. We can't all recommend it highly enough, can we?
No, it's brilliant.
Yeah. So if there's anything else we'd like to add, we might do so, and before we maybe wrap up.
Jen, I'd just like to say to Tara June Winch, marvellous work. Congratulations. All the accolades that you're getting are well deserved, and to thank you really sincerely for a beautiful, beautiful piece of work.
Ditto.
One little thing we haven't touched on much at all, and I think it's the Greenleaf story. It's the immigrant story, and it's interesting that in some ways that's what Tara June has become. And she was saying in the sort of Q&A from State Library announcement of her awards that she feels very connected to Europe now, and her next novel will be set in Switzerland, although the one after that will be about Australia again. So I don't know, there's something I find really interesting about a Wiradjuri person living in Europe. You know, when we, all the history of Aboriginal people being taken from Australia back to Europe, pretty terrible situations really, but here's a positive story of a Wiradjuri woman being an international, you know, being part of the diaspora in some way. So yeah, just another side of her personality and this story as well. That it's part of it's that internationality has such a positive side, has such a terrible side at the moment with the pandemic, but it's part of what we question as well. What the importance of home, but the importance of being able to also, for Aboriginal people to be able to feel at home in other parts of the world as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little, I don't have an answer. I just found it an interesting element, and the Greenleaf story too. That that when times get bad, we suddenly don't accept people from other parts of the world. It was part of his story. Sorry, just little tangent.
I think I know the answer to that, though, Stephen. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have if you're like me and like Yana, we have a strong sense of our identity, like who we are, and what country we're connected to. And Yana's coming back into photo bomb again. But what I'm talking about is for Tara June. She has that too. She knows she's Wiradjuri. She knows who she is. She knows of her backstory. She knows about her kinship and her ties to country. And so I can I can understand that, because I don't work on Wiradjuri country, you know, but I get I leave and then I come home every week. But the best part about my work and the work that, you know, my professional journey that I'm on now is that I get to come home. So, you know, I belong here in Wiradjuri country. So it's about your sense of belonging and who you are and where you come from. So your past, you know, which puts you right here in your presence, and also your future. So I think that for her, it wouldn't matter where she went to, like on this planet, like, you know, on the earth, she knows who she is, and she knows where she belongs, and she knows where she comes from. And, you know, the doors, you know, that swinging gate at, you know, at the front of Wiradjuri country will always be open to her, you know, because what happens for us as Wiradjuri, and happens to all of us as Aboriginal people, is your country calls you home, and your old people call you home. And I think that, you know, she'll hear that, you know, she'll hear them calling and she will come home. But for now, it's like me, you know, we know who we are, you know, we know where we come from, and we know where our old people come from, and we know our song lines and our country and our stories and, you know, our dreaming, our sky law, like Yana and I know all of that, you know. And that's a part of, you know, our DNA as Wiradjuri.
It was interesting that Tara June, I think she said in that interview that she, in some ways, it's very clear that she knows her country and knows it well. And I mean, the detail is amazing through the book, but that in some ways she found it easier to write this book or finish it in France than if she was able to step out and be distracted by her country in Australia. It was more that she had to remember it, that rather than be in it. It's an interesting comment.
I think as well, she said that she first thought about this book in 2004 when she was writing Swallow the Air, and she did, I think, Wirribee a language course with Uncle Stan Grant Sr. And so it this novel was a long gestation. It was, you know, more than 10 years. And when we get to hear her talk about it after this session, I think it's one of the things she speaks about. But like you say, Wirribee, her connection to country is unending and so strong, and her desire to write this book has been within her for such a long time.
Yeah, and that's what I think for us as Aboriginal people, and also like for me personally, like we're grounded in country, you know, like Yana and I have to do this all the time, you know, Bidai knows how to do this too. Like when we're in country, we ground ourselves in country. You know, it's very different to the way that non-Aboriginal people like do, you know, move around, I suppose, you know, in town or in a city. Like we always have to come home and ground ourselves in country. And, you know, for her, you know, I'm looking forward to having this face-to-face conversation with her, you know, and, you know, having the yarn about country, you know, because that's what connects us all, I think, as Australians, you know, is the love of this country that we all have.
And I think that is a perfect way to end our conversation. Thank you, Wirribee. Mandangul, to all of you, you wonderful panelists, to all the readers who have read this wonderful book, and have tuned in today in support of the Great Festival Read Session and the Bathurst Writers and Readers Festival. We hope that we'll be back in person again next year, but I'd really like to thank Kylie and Heidi from BMEC for making this online festival possible. They've worked so hard and we're so very grateful. I'd also like to encourage you all to continue, all readers, to be reading Australian novels, and if you haven't read The Yield, put it at the top of your list, and to support writers such as Tara June Winch and all Australian writers. Thank you. Because without them at this time, the arts sector is really struggling. And so buying her book, buying other Australian writers' books will do so much to support them and to support publishers. And also please support local bookstores as well through this time. So thank you all again. And I'd just like to ask Wirribee and Yana to send us out. Thank you.
All right, I'll start. Mandangul, everyone. It's really been a privilege to sit here with you all. I feel really honoured to have this conversation with you all, and it's great to introduce Tara's book in this way. I hope a lot of people read it, and thank you all for your time. It's been a really good session. We've learnt from each other, I think, as we do when we sit in these sort of situations, which is Yinja Maljura Yabalinya Mawang, if I'm right, Sissy, which is two-way respectful learning together, which is what we've just done now. And I hope that translates across the interwebs to everyone else that listens in. And Mandangul, and as mentioned before, if anything sort of upset you or triggered any emotions, please do seek support. There's going to be a number at the bottom and a website that you can click on. Or if you want to get in touch with any of the panelists, please get in touch with Jenny, and we'd be more than happy to keep the conversation going. Mandangul. Sis?
So, I talking, yep. Thank you to all the other panelists too that sat in. I haven't done this before, so I actually really enjoyed the process. And I think that, you know, this week is, like I said, is a pretty emotional week for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But, you know, the light that we have, you know, the beacon we have, especially in this this week and in the pandemic that we sit in as a country and a world, you know, we've got this little book that we can all sit with and you know, go on a different journey. So I really, thanks to Jen and to the BMAC staff for inviting Yana and myself and Bidai to come in. We're looking forward to doing this with Tara June face to face. So stay tuned, and yeah, when this crisis is over, we're hoping that she'll come home and we'll be able to do some. We'll be able to have a face to face yarn. But yeah, Mandangu. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you all so much, and thank you for that beautiful farewell. I'm a bit teary now.
Well done, everyone. It was great. It was just another terrific discussion. It was fabulous. I really appreciate all your thoughts and input. It's made me learn a lot of stuff. So thank you very much.
Mandango.
Manango. Thanks, everybody.
Mandangu, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.